Hello, and thank you for joining us today in our study of 1 Samuel. Today we are in 1 Samuel chapter 18. And as we come into this chapter, David has just defeated Goliath. He has now been brought back to the king's house, and while he has spent time there as a king's musician, he is now there in a very different light. And it's going to cause some very difficult and different circumstances in the life of David. And so today I want to notice a couple of lessons that we can see from the events that occur in chapter 18. And we could pull 6 or 7 of them very easily out of this, but I want to limit it today to 3. And so let's begin by looking at verse 5. Jonathan and David become very close friends. Jonathan, it's stated in verses 3 and 4, loves David as his own soul. He gives him such things as his robe and his armor and his sword and his bow and his belt. Remember that these are going to be things that he would not have had access to himself. In chapters 16 and 17, we find that there is no real armor for most of the men in the army of Israel at this time, and there are very few weapons. And so this would be a very personal gift, and it would be a very important gift for a man who has just done such great deeds. But then you come to verse 5, and you see David's behavior. You see the way David handles himself in the midst of all of these things that are transpiring. And verse 5 says that David went out wherever Saul sent him and behaved wisely. Saul set him over the men of war, and he was accepted in the sight of all the people and also in the sight of Saul's servants. David doesn't get arrogant or cocky, or he doesn't become prideful or abusive or any of those things. David's behavior is that he handles himself well. He stays humble. He stays kind. He is one who is going to receive the rewards of the feelings of the people around him. He is going to be accepted by them. And remember, he is just a young shepherd's boy. He is not anybody of great importance, and that's going to come into account later on in the chapter. He is not going to be anyone of any great wealth. He is not going to be anybody that should be somebody in this country, and yet he is. But David keeps a firm head on his shoulders, and he does not allow it to go to his head. He does not become prideful or arrogant. And there is something to be said for an individual that can achieve a great success and be considered something great, and yet not allow that to overwhelm them and not allow that to control them. David gives us an illustration here of a man who, while achieving great success among his people, is one who remains humble and is one who goes about and just seeks to do what is asked of him. Now, unfortunately, Saul is not going to see David in that light. As a matter of fact, Saul is going to be afraid of David, and that's going to be our second area to consider today. Saul is going to be afraid of David on a couple of different levels. The first one begins to be found in verse number 8. When the people begin to sing, the women begin to sing that Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. Saul is being placed on a lower pedestal than David. He sees his popularity is waning to David. And Saul has now been on the throne for almost 30 years at this point. He has been one who has been the ruler now for decades. And the power has gone to Saul's head. Saul is now afraid of David because David is popular, because the people like David, because he is paranoid about how he is going to lose his kingdom. Remember, the promise has already been made that that is going to take place. And now Saul is going to act in such a way that he is going to treat David as his enemy, even though David has done nothing but help Saul. Even though David has made no overtones of wanting to take Saul's place, even though David has never done anything to step against Saul. Saul is going to, in verse 11, try to kill David with a spear. David is going to dodge twice those particular attempts. But Saul is afraid. And verse 12 tells us that Saul is afraid most of all because the Lord is with David. And the Lord is no longer with Saul. Now you would think that in Saul's mind this would cause him to stop and think that maybe he should treat David kindly and well because the Lord is with David. And yet that's not the way Saul sees it. Saul sees the Lord being with David as a threat because his actions have driven the Lord away from him. And so, much like Cain toward Abel, he is going to blame David for his relationship with God. And he is going to be afraid of him because of it. But then in the third place, when you drop down into verse number 18, you see once again David's demeanor in all of this, but I want you to notice the terminology that David uses. He says in verse 18, "Who am I? And what is my life or my father's family in Israel that I should be son-in-law to the king?" Now you would think, on the one hand, that David would have reservations to being son-in-law to the king because the king has already tried to kill him on a couple of different occasions. The king obviously does not engender great favor toward David. And he is showing great signs of instability on the mental side of things. But David's mind is not focused on that. It's focused on the fact that he has nothing to offer as a dowry. He has no great riches or wealth and no great claim to success other than the defeat of Goliath. Who am I? There is humility that is there. And David's humility is going to serve him well in this time and in this place. However, there are many occasions in which people will look at themselves and say, "Who am I? What good am I to be able to do this? Or who am I to be the one to be able to accomplish this? Or why would anybody look to me to do this?" And we need to remember that just because we come from a certain background, or just because we've gone through certain things in our lives, doesn't mean that we are disqualified from being able to do things that are important and to be successful and to have good things in life. David here is going to be a rising star in Israel because the Lord is with him, because he has sought to do what is right, and because he has been one who has not let success go to his head. Who am I? It doesn't have to be somebody who's wealthy. As a matter of fact, God has often taken those from very lowly positions and put them in places where they can be very successful in their lives and in their service to him and in their service to those around him. We need to be careful that we do not shortchange ourselves because of who we are or what our background is, and instead recognize that we can be servants of God and we can do great things. We can be successful no matter where we come from if we're willing to serve him and if we're willing to keep our focus and our attitude where it should be. Not on the fact that we deserve everything or that it's owed to us in some way, but in thankful humility, hard work, and the desire to be pleasing to God. David is going to illustrate that throughout the remainder of chapter 18, as he is going to go and he is not just going to do exactly what Saul asked him to do in order to receive his daughter as a wife. He's going to do twice as much. He is going to give double of what Saul asked. Now, Saul gave him what he thought was an impossible task so that he might be killed along the way, and yet David is once again going to disappoint Saul in this arena. But there are a number of things that we can see in this chapter when it comes to David's attitude, Saul's fears, David's behavior, and also how we look at ourselves. And that's not even getting into the actual events and the actual framework of what transpires, which definitely are things that are of value and importance as well. But I hope that the things that we've talked about today will be useful to you. And next time, Lord willing, we will come back and we will begin going through chapter 19. Until then, have a great day.